Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Dooho Choi of naming a new Korean boy, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you after UFC 310. Surprisingly decent. I actually expected this one to have some decent stuff on it. There was a little bit of depressing bollocks, and there were quite a few guys on this card who I was wondering why they're here. I think we're in this peculiar place in fight sports where some of the MMA organizations have worked out that they get publicity for signing fighters, and then if they don't give them fights, they don't have to pay them, which is currently what One Championship and PFL are doing, much to the chagrin of the fighters. Lots of fighters asking for their release from PFL and One. They had DJ is such a company guy. They had DJ out here saying that he's been offered $2 million to fight. And it's like, that's the perfect outcome that you don't want to fight, because you're telling everyone that they're going to offer you $2 million, which they don't have, to fight, but you're not going to fight. What a great advertisement. But the other end of that is that the UFC has so many fighters on the roster now that if you tally up the number of spots, say 12 fights on a card, which is the standard, the number of cards they do a year, which I believe is somewhere between 45 and 48. That's what it's been since 2014. So anyone who tells you this is getting worse because of the number of events is wrong. But if you tally it all up, it's actually impossible for everyone to be offered, or for everyone to take their 3 fights they're supposed to be offered legally a year. Now, of course, that's like airlines overselling flights. There's a certain number of people who aren't going to make it to fights. They're going to get injured. There's a certain number of people who are going to turn down fights. But this card was 2 fights longer than it should have been. I mean, it's a 14-fight card. They've been doing 12 and sometimes even like 11 or 10 this year. 14-fight card. And there were a load of people on it who you were like, how are they still with the UFC? Nick Diaz was on, but obviously dropped out. Both Eric Anders and Chris Weidman. Lucas Brzeski is on like a 6-fight losing streak in the UFC. Clay Guida should retire and did retire. Anthony Smith, obviously. I mean, he does win some fights, but obviously... Well, did he retire at the end of his fight? But anyway, yeah, there was a lot of like filler on here. Gracie, we'll get into in a minute. But the main event delivered, in my humble opinion. And then the co-main event was an interesting battle between 2 guys who had never known defeat. But, 2 undefeated prospects at the highest levels of the game meeting to decide the next challenger for the UFC welterweight title. It was about as good a matchup as you could ask for. What I saw was high level, maybe not the most entertaining stuff in the world for a lot of people, but we'll talk about that later on. Main event, let's talk about it. Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura, the man from Japan. Part of the intrigue of this fight was like, what will DC do? Because if he's not been present for the fight, how's he going to do the research? Because he's never going to watch a fight. He's never going to do any research. Dom Cruz called him out for that. He got offended, and then he doubled down to not do any research. But it actually worked out really well because none of the guys in the booth seemed to know anything about Asakura. So they called the fight. It was great. Didn't have DC telling us about the great time he had at Power Slap and the crazy Hawaiians entrance. In fact, if you go back and listen to that fight, it's very funny because DC almost doesn't say anything. For the 7-minute duration of the fight, he sits largely in silence. Now, I think most of us expected Pantoja to win. I don't know if they expected, if everyone, if you didn't know Kai Asakura and you think the Ryzen's crap, then maybe you expected Pantoja to roll over him. But anyone who'd seen Kai Asakura knows that if there's one thing you can say about him, it's that he brings it. He stops a good takedown. He hammers people with knees. He's got decent hands, and he gets hit a lot, but he does so in the course of landing counters. He'll move backwards, taking punches, and then land a good right hand. Which, if you're Alexandre Pantoja and you run forward throwing right hand, you could Verdum Stipe yourself. And Kai Asakura came out and demanded to be taken seriously because he was backed onto the fence almost immediately and leapt into a flying knee that hit Pantoja in the chest as he was ducking. But everyone went, oh, that could have turned out a lot worse, and I'm sure Pantoja thought that too. First sort of 2-3 minutes, Pantoja's chasing him around the cage, trying to get hold of him, pumping double 1-2s, hit him with a good left hook as he was circling on the cage. But the sort of change in this fight came when he worked out that Kai was trying to like jump into a big knee or land a big counter. And if he just poked Kai with the oblique kicks or the teeps to the knee and the thigh, Kai couldn't really do that. He had to either pick up his legs to try and check them or move his feet back to try and check let them fall short. There was one where he got right by the fence and he stepped forward as if to come off the fence and jump into a knee. And he took an oblique kick straight in the leg and it straightened his leg and he couldn't jump. So there's about 3 occasions in that late first and then early second round where Pantoja is just poking at the legs, not even like committing to, he's not trying to stamp on his legs. He's just poking the knee and the thigh. You'll see this a lot in Muay Thai, not the kick to the front of the knee, but the teep to the thigh really is just sort of a, don't step in now, it's not a good time technique. And he was poking those and then he'd just step in with a 1-2 and chin Asakura along the fence. There were a couple of takedowns in this that were cool foot sweeps. I mentioned Pantoja sort of bringing them into his game. In the Ursig fight, he hit a beautiful power twist, which is the body lock, step your knee inside theirs and then turn. And you'll see guys do it off the fence all the time, but he did it out in the open. So the guy has to sort of hop, trying to get over your thigh. So he has to hop on one leg. And Pantoja swept out the standing leg off that throw, so it was a little 2-piece, and it worked very well. But in this one, he did some kind of strange sweep with his back to the fence, where Kai just sort of fell over. And I watched it about 4 times, and I think the camera angle changed mid-move, so I couldn't really see it, which was annoying me last week when I did the film room on Shavkat, because he hit some beautiful sweeps, and like knee sweeps, foot sweeps, big throws, but they'll change the camera midway through, or they'll just be filming his back in the clinch. I'd like to see everyone's feet all the time, is what I'm saying. I'm Quentin Tarantino of MMA. When Pantoja's feet aren't on screen, everyone should be asking, where are Pantoja's feet? But the one that he hit, I think to begin this sort of end sequence, he got Kai to the fence. He's got underhooks, but Kai's got a really good whizzer, and he throws Pantoja past him and starts circling out. So Pantoja's sort of losing upper body connection. Pantoja sticks out his foot basically onto the side of Asakura's knee. I think it's a knee wheel, a Hizagaruma in judo. But it's kind of like a Sasai Surukomiyashi, but you're blocking the knee from stepping as opposed to coming down low on the foot. But that sweep, I think, made Asakura turn his back and Pantoja got back body lock. And then eventually he hit a little sweep and got on the floor on Asakura's back. And this is we talk about this every week. Most people, when they get on an opponent's back and they're on the floor and they're both looking up at the ceiling, that's really more of a stalemate position. You've kind of lost the dominance you had if you've advanced from like a good position to on their back. Because you can't really hit from there. But what I really liked was Pantoja got the figure 4 on the body, and then he started swimming arms in front of, both arms over the shoulders, which can open you up to more escapes because the guy can duck under your arms. He can try and get his head to the floor. It's a little bit, you lose a bit of control if you don't have one arm over and one arm under. But he was just swimming backwards and forwards. And I think the referee stepped in front of him, or the camera, just as he was doing this. But I think he did something that Ethan Krellinston does. Go look up Ethan Krellinston rear naked choke. But he swims an arm through like around their face and threatens to start squeezing. And as they bring their hands up to sort of like claw down on his arm, he chops that arm down so that he takes out both of their hands and swims his other arm through straight into the choke. I think that's what Pantoja was able to do here. And what I really liked was he went gable grip, hand to hand, and hid his hands behind Asakura's shoulder. I felt like Garry in the Shavkat fight could have done better with a palm-to-palm grip. But he also got very high on Shavkat. Shavkat's head was like way down in the middle of his chest, where you want to be like ear to ear nuzzling. But standard Pantoja, he's kind of reckless sometimes, but that leads people to miss how good he is. I think because everyone was treated to DJ just running clinics with very good technical kickboxing. Well, very good in like he didn't get hit a lot, but there was still a lot of running forwards and backwards on a line. But he was very clean and he managed to get away from a lot of strikes. Whereas Pantoja has always been like a hard-nosed, I'm going out there to... Well, is he the cannibal? Is his nickname the cannibal? Because he's basically going out there to chew the guy up and he doesn't care if he gets hit in the face in response. Which is not normally a recipe for longevity, but certainly now it's so hard to argue with his results because he's got, 9-0 against the top 5, plus a win over the long-time rising champion or long-time winning and losing it rising champion. Basically, the only guy of note in that division he hasn't beaten is Kara France. Even at the height of DJ's dominance, he was taking a lot of fights from very early on with guys like Chris Carriasso, John Moraga, And there were the good ones. There were the fights with John Dodson. Ian McCall was very good back in the day. Joseph Benavidez. But then there's a big break before like Henry Cejudo and Henry Cejudo 2. There's a 20-year-old Kyoji Horiguchi who's very raw. But like there's a lot of fights in there against nobodies. Like Steve Erceg and Kai Asakura, they were sort of out of left field challengers, but they were somebody. They're not John Moraga. So while he's not doing it in the same ways, I think you have to admit that what Pantoja is doing is pretty special. Meanwhile, Asakura didn't get a lot off, but I felt like he gave a decent account of himself. It was clear he was there to bang. He did throw that lovely right hand into step-up left knee, and if you watch the left knee in the replay, he turns it in, and it comes in just at the ribs on the liver side. Oh, it's really lovely. Who did that? Well, I think Namba Kwan used to do that well in Muay Thai. He'd throw the right hand, and it would be basically a cover because he'd already be running up into that left knee. But welcome aboard, Kai Asakura. There's loads of fun fights for you here. The flyweights are, well, certainly the top end of flyweights looking pretty good now. At the post-fight press conference, Dana White said that he wanted to work more with Rizin, and he just had a meeting with Sakakibara. I think a lot of people I think some people felt that would be like some kind of cool Rizin UFC cooperation. No, what that means is like what he does with Cage Warriors. Head of the promotion will let them use a fighter within their contract, but take a cut as like manager. Like how Graham Boylan from Cage Warriors is basically Paddy Pimblett's manager, because Paddy Pimblett was still under contract with Cage Warriors when the UFC signed him. So all you're going to get is like the three good guys from Rizin coming over to the UFC, and Sakakibara will take a cut of their pay. Which is sad because the point of Rizin is, you watch it for the spectacle, it is a fun event, but the couple of good guys over there really do make the cards. I wish Rizin had the PFL roster because they would make a much better use of it. And one-night tournaments are legal over there. Not just legal, they're traditional. Should we do some bad fights or should we do a good one? Let's do co-main event. Well, actually, a lot of people think that's a bad fight, but I was really hyped for this. I did a film room on Shavkat this week, which you should check out. Didn't do anything on Ian Garry, but I was honestly, Shavkat won, and I think if you're going by the 10-9 system that we are going by, of course he won. If we were going pride rules, which is people like to bring up when their favourite fighter loses 4 rounds but almost locks in a choke, if we go pride rules, Garry won. But as someone who finds Ian Garry annoying as a media presence, I was more impressed by Garry than I was by Shavkat in this one. Though I did see some terrible takes, like Shavkat's wrestling is clearly not as advertised or whatever. Go watch the film room, but like I said in the film room, Shavkat, I watched all his fights and he doesn't shoot a takedown until the 10th professional fight. Him going after Stephen Thompson's legs in their fight was very unusual. Shavkat's strength is striking into upper body clinches and then tripping. He has a really, really strong judo, sambo, whatever you want to call it. What's the Kazakh equivalent of like bok? But he's got a really strong tripping game, which means that he can throw knees and give up. All of Shavkat's fights, he backs the guy towards the cage, he throws a big stepping knee, the guy grabs his leg, or an underhook, and Shavkat turns himself onto the fence with the overhook and starts throwing from there, which I've said 100 times is like the way to get off the fence now is to learn an overhook throw and just go for it like Islam Makhachev does. It's worked on Khamzat. It's worked on like the best guys. If you go watch Alice Garov versus Khamzat, he doesn't actually manage to throw him all the way, but he gets off the fence and back into the center of the cage, which is a hard ask against Khamzat Chimaev. But Shavkat seems capable of actually like putting himself on the fence and getting the throw almost 100% of the time, which is very impressive. Now, Ian Garry started out in judo and apparently has a very strong judo background. So Shavkat was having real trouble throwing him or tripping him. And then he had to go for like the legs and stuff, and he just isn't as good. And people were going, well, as soon as he went for the legs, he got Garry down. But a lot of those things came off like a spinning back fist by Garry. He got him down off. It was a really interesting matchup that played out in a really interesting way. And I think some people took away the message that it was just like Shavkat's been fraud checked. Bilal will obviously beat this man, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what Bilal's judo's like. I don't know what Bilal's upper body clinch game's like. He's very much like up and down with the punches, shoot on the hips along the fence. I don't think this fight told us as much about the clinch in that fight as people think it did. But Shavkat hit, I've heard it called a trap hook dump, a trap dump, a dresser dump, but it's where you grab the single leg and you come up and club them around the head with the other arm. You basically like clothesline them while they're on one leg. And so a trap hook dump is where you grab the trap and pull them back the other way. So you can take them both ways off it. GSP was phenomenal at this. And Shavkat hit one in like the second round. And then in the fifth round, he went for it. And as his arm came up to clothesline Garry, Garry on one leg ducked it, got behind him with a claw grip and got on his back, which was really impressive. A great read to make in the moment. Striking was kind of contained. Shavkat landed one good punch in the first and second, which basically won in the rounds. Garry was looking for a left high kick on Shavkat's right side. I feel like watching this fight, it was the left hook, like a long left hook, the spinning back fist. And did he throw a wheel kick at some point? Shavkat throws the odd wheel kick, of course, but I felt like a lot of Garry's offense was focused on something he'd seen with Shavkat's right hand leaving his guard. But aside from that, not an awful lot to talk about because it was a grindy clinch fight for the most part. I do hope they honour giving whoever the matchup or whoever the welterweight title fight. While this event was going on, or rather like in the days around this event, they announced that the UFC are doing Dricus versus Strickland 2 for the middleweight title again, which is, I think everyone alive was like, well, now I need to see Khamzat versus Dricus, but they're going to milk one more out of Strickland. I feel like if people felt that strongly about the first fight, they could happily wait for a non-title fight between those two. But I was looking at that and just thinking, oh God, because while I was watching the UFC card, they did their big opening where it was like, 2024 was a non-stop year of highlights with amazing events, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, the first half of 2024 kind of sucked, basically up to UFC 300. And then there were quite a few months after UFC 300 where they just kept booking crap cards. And everyone in the replies would be like, well, this is what you get when you book UFC 300. You have to have some crap cards afterwards. And you go, but there were crap cards up to it. And it's only like sort of July onwards, things really got cooking for a little bit there. So I'm worrying that the 2025 is going to be the same for the first half, now that they've booked that. At least they said they're doing Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez, which sounds banger. Cyril Gane versus Volkov, I honestly don't care very much. This was kind of a sloppy fight. Right, let's go for something ridiculous. Bryce Mitchell versus Crone Gracie. What the hell is Crone Gracie doing back? He had 3 years off after the Cub Swanson fight. Oh, almost 4 years off. Cub Swanson comes back against Charles Jourdain, does a load of guard pulling, loses because it's 2024. Comes in against Bryce Mitchell. In the interviews leading up to this, he'd been like, people got in my ear, the wrong people, my family. They were telling me, don't throw strikes, play the jiu-jitsu, show the jiu-jitsu. Which is so weird because Crone Gracie's story is that he's Rickson Gracie's son, but basically through his entire coming up as a jiu-jitsu prospect, his dad was in Brazil. He didn't see his dad. So he trained with other people and got great that way. And for him to then be like, my family, blah, blah, it's very weird. It's like, you're in a cult, mate. Get out. He said all that on Ariel Helwani's show and other people's shows. And then he came in and did the same thing. And it's like, oh, Sun Tzu, you deceived him. Say you're not going to do the stupid thing, but then do the stupid thing. So Mitchell just kept his elbows in and popped him with punches from inside the guard and so on, hit him when he stood up. Crone did do, he was getting an underhook, sort of like Rickson used to do it in his fights. It's called like an underwrap, or was called an underwrap when Rickson did it. I suppose it's a pinch headlock now, but it's where you get an underhook from closed guard and you wrap your hands around their head and underhook. Someone who's very good at it in real MMA fights is Roberto Satoshi. I think he's the rising champion at the moment, but he'll be coming to the UFC probably. But Crone wasn't having much luck. He did attack like a razor arm lock or a straight arm lock, whatever you want to call it, on that arm. And then Bryce pulled his elbow in and Crone swung his hips to the other side and threw up an arm bar. And that was pretty nice. But it's like, I saw a lot of people likening Crone Gracie to Ryan Hall after this fight. And I think that's quite short-sighted because Ryan Hall was trying to invent or trying to, to create or apply new ways to get the fight to the ground on his terms when he wasn't a particularly strong wrestler. But he still was working his wrestling. He was just trying to create new ways to get the guy to the ground. He wasn't straight out just like jumping at the guy and trying to pull him on top of him. He was doing the weird roll-throughs. He was overhooking the leg and rolling, and they weren't always working great. But he was just sort of like carrying the torch of Imanari. It's how do you weaponize a guard pull, because the guard pull is not a very useful technique. Crone was literally just trying to jump, try to grab a hold and pull the guy down, which is really bad in MMA. If you want to see like the difference, Ryan Hall versus BJ Penn is a perfect example of not even a weaponized guard pull. That is an attack. It's not really wrestling, but it's sort of wrestling, but it's also like brings you straight into jiu-jitsu or submission grappling. But if that's all you do, then you do get predictable. So then there's the other side of that, which is the Damian Maia thing, which is like just get good at wrestling. Because Damian Maia, literal genius of jiu-jitsu, got his black belt in 4 years and then was winning world titles. And if you ever watch his first instruction, well, he's put out some new ones since, but his original instructional set is still so good because he's very good at explaining what he means. And it's just like this dude came into jiu-jitsu and was like, understood the concepts immediately in a way that when he tells you them, you go like, oh, that's so simple an idiot could do it. And you obviously never get into the same level as Damian Maia, but he just had a mind for it. But even he, with a brilliant guard, worked out that the single leg and the half guard up into the single leg were going to be the keys. Damian Maia's your guy. Whenever someone says, because like people go, is jiu-jitsu done? Is jiu-jitsu cooked? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, you can't do any single discipline and come into MMA and expect to get to the highest levels. You can be like combat sambo or kudo or whatever, involves striking and grappling in the gi, blah, 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 but it doesn't involve cage wrestling. The striking's different. There's a fucking gi. To succeed in the highest levels of MMA, you have to do MMA. And to rely on guard pulling and trying to prove your jiu-jitsu at the highest levels of MMA when you're already at the highest levels of MMA is just pig-headedness. It's like, yeah, you could do that. In Rising, he was submitting people by jumping guard and so on. But if you're going to fight the best guys in the world, in the best organization in the world, he didn't win the Rising title. He didn't beat the best guys in Rising either. But you kind of have to commit to getting good at fighting and not just jiu-jitsu under jiu-jitsu rules. It's like Gilbert Burns, Durinho. You would not know that he was a several-time world champion in the gi. You would not know that in jiu-jitsu, he was famous for like inventing stalling from the 50-50 leg entanglement. Because he came to MMA and started knocking people out, throwing them on their heads, doing cool MMA things. No one really remembers that, or even knows to begin with, that he was a gi guy doing like the most gi-centric sort of game you can have. Hold the 50-50 because the guy can't heel hook you because you're in the gi and it's illegal. So anyway, Bryce Mitchell did the right thing here, poking him with punches and kicks on the feet, disregarding any threat of a takedown, keeping things tight when he got onto the mat. And then Crone literally jumped guard in the third round. You'd be better off just trying to break the guy's knee by jumping on it, like the horrible, horrible tournament clips you see on YouTube and Instagram in the gi. But Crone jumped up, locked his legs around him, and it's like, I've never seen that end well in MMA because you're up in the air. Falling body weight is always the one that hurts people, but you're up in the air, you don't have a lot of control over him. You're basically saying, I'm going to eat the slam and then I'm going to try and submit you after that. So Bryce Mitchell slammed him and then hit him with an elbow, and Gracie was basically done. Very weird. You got to partly blame the Diaz brothers for being involved with Crone's life. If Crone had gone to like ATT from the beginning or a real gym, we might have gotten somewhere. Oh, that's funny. I was just looking at Crone's record, and in 2011, Gilbert Burns beat him in the gi. Honestly, one of the best things that ever happened to Crone was that Marcelo Garcia retired, because he was this is going to be the case with everyone at Marcelo Garcia's weight, but every ADCC he'd turn up and then Marcelo Garcia would be there and he'd be like, right, I've lost. Better poke him in the eyes a few times first. But then Crone's ADCC run where he actually wins after Marcelo retires is pretty impressive. He basically guillotines everyone. Anyway, glad Bryce Mitchell gets a win. He can now get back to appearing on talk shows to be like, seatbelts cost more lives than they save and stuff. The dude is a human blue tick. Whatever the thing that makes everyone go, what are you saying? He'll do that. Let's talk about something good. Choi versus Nate Landwehr. I love Landwehr. He was great in the pre-fight. It's the accent and the look. He looks and sounds like he's going to be a dummy. But someone was asking at the press conference, they're going, obviously your opponent is from this part of the world, and Kai Asakura in the main event is from the same part of the world. Do you think beating them will hurt your popularity over here? And he's staring at the guy through the question and doesn't even blink for about 14 seconds. And then at the end he goes, well, you're talking about Japan and Korea, and those are in fact different places. And he has to he stops short of explaining the Second World War and everything before that to this guy. But it's just very funny. And then afterwards I found out he's been married to a Korean woman for 10 years and goes to Korea regularly. And it's even funnier because he was in M1. He was I think he was the M1 champion at one point, but he was fighting in M1, which is a Russian organization. Every event is in Russia or Ukraine. He was doing that for like 2 or 3 years. So he knows what it's like to be like the foreigner on the card. But I liked his answer. He was like, people who like fighting will like fights. It's like another one of those Nate Landwehr-isms, like, if I don't lose, I'll probably win. But enough Landwehr praise, because the poor guy got the piss beaten out of him in this fight. Do-Ho Choi. I mean, he won his last one by knockout, and I remember watching it, but I don't really remember being blown away. This time, oh boy, knocked my socks off. This lad, when he came into the UFC back in the day, he was a right-hand counter, and that was about it. Sometimes he'd throw it over your jab, sometimes he'd slip and throw it inside your jab, and inside right, which is quite a rare counterpunch. But that was it. Wasn't super impressed in his return against Kyle Nelson, because obviously he lost a couple. He got his hype train derailed by the Cub Swanson fight. Jeremy Stevens knocked him out. Charles Jourdain knocked him out. Went on military service because he's a Korean lad, because he's a young Korean lad, or he was a young Korean lad before he was in the army. Now he's an old Korean lad. But like Korean Zombie, he had a couple of years of his career taken by national service. And I know they say that they'll give you a desk job or whatever if you're an athlete so that you can still train. Your job is to wipe down the national StarCraft team's big-titted mouse pads. But this fight, his boxing looked superb. And he made a beautiful read, which is Nate Landwehr likes the triangle guard, the sort of like hands on the front of your head, elbows out in front of you as a wedge. It's also like a bull guard. You're using the top of your head to get in behind it. But basically, it's if you're not moving your head, which Landwehr doesn't do a lot, it's saying, here are some obstructions. They will make it harder for you to dome me as I try and walk in on you. And Do-Ho Choi made the read that was, this dude is going to be a left uppercuttable. And you probably haven't seen a lot of fights where guys score good left uppercuts or lead hand uppercuts in like the true uppercut way, because I haven't. And I've watched a lot of fights. People ask me for examples sometimes, and I'm like, I can barely think of a few. Like, what I'm not talking about is like an up jab or a reaching lead uppercut, like Conor McGregor using it to set up his left straight, or Nazim Hamed, his weird corkscrew uppercut to set up his left straight, or an up jab or anything like that. What I'm talking about is squaring up or getting in nice and tight and throwing a full power, short left uppercut under the jaw with the same intention that like a close-in right uppercut would have. And Jack Dempsey talked about it in his book and said it's like one of the harder punches to land because you've got to square up and get real close. And he said the only time that he ever got it was in fighting along the ropes. Alexis Arguello was pretty good with it. But the trick here was using the overhand, kind of like Kai Asakura used his right, or Nambu Kwan used his right hand to just run into the knee. Throw the overhand and dive in with it, which is what Do-Ho Choi was doing. He threw the overhand, and sometimes it would land behind Landwehr's guard, and sometimes it would land on Landwehr's guard. But as he threw it, he basically put his head on Landwehr's right shoulder. And then he threw the left uppercut from real close in immediately afterwards. The overhand right to left uppercut is sometimes called a C-cut combination. I got that terminology, I think, from Greg Jackson. But Matthew Saad Mohammed, one of the greatest knockouts ever. Can't even remember who it's over, but just search that name. Beautiful C-cut combination, knocks a dude flat. The idea is that the overhand hits the guard and moves the guy a little bit onto the line of your left uppercut, which comes up through the middle and makes him bite his tongue in half. But yeah, that left uppercut was constant here. And the lead hand uppercut has really helped, certainly in a closed stance matchup. A left uppercut against an orthodox fighter is really helped along by a guy sort of hunching forwards and trying to, bite down his mouthpiece and walk in. Jack Sharkey versus Jack Dempsey. Dempsey, the legend. Sharkey, once described as the greatest fighter in the world from the neck down, because he had a tendency to sort of lose his head. But Sharky reads him beautifully in the first half of that fight, and he keeps stepping back with his right leg, sort of extending his stance and squaring his shoulders. And as Dempsey steps in, he unloads the left uppercut. Roy Jones was also really good at this. He would put his right hand out straight in front of him, like at the opponent's face, sometimes like palm facing them. And as they stepped in, he would throw the left uppercut up the middle. But his was more of sort of like a reaching lead one. I'm talking about like short in close ones. So that was super cool. And everything else was great too. Like he was throwing low kicks. He got some takedowns. Landwehr was trying to make things happen, which is going to be a theme when we talk about Aljo versus Evloev. There is a risk-reward thing, particularly in grappling, but in all fighting. If you're losing, you can try and make something happen. I mean, you can shell up and you can just lose, but get to the end. The epitome of this was Joshua Clottey when he fought Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao was at the height of his powers. Joshua Clottey was like, but he'll never knock me out. And Joshua Clottey literally just put on the earmuffs and took about 700 punches. And he came out of that being like, moral victory. And everyone else came out of that being like, okay, you did absolutely nothing. You risked nothing. And now no one remembers Joshua Clottey at all. But it's very tempting. If you're a fighter and you want to live to fight another day and you want to be safe and you want to get your paycheck and leave, and you've already probably submitted to the fact that you're probably losing, so fine, I'll lose, I'll come back another day, I've lost half my paycheck or whatever. But if you want to win, you've got to make stuff happen, and that involves taking more risks. So Landwehr was out there taking risks, and like some of them were, like when he got put on the bottom, he's reaching inside of Do-Ho Choi's leg and trying to push it into half guard and stuff, and he ends up like putting himself in a mounted crucifix, which is a perfect example. And he got finished from the mounted crucifix, but it happened, I think, twice in this fight. He reached for the inside of the ankle, which is it's a legit thing. You can pass the inside of the ankle to your top leg and then you can wrestle your way up. But if you botch it, or the guy notices it and like sprawls his hips on top of your arm, you can get stuck there. Or what I did like, though, was that it was another one of those ones of like a Hail Mary technique actually being one of the smartest things to do in the occasion. Do-Ho Choi, as we said, he was throwing the overhand and then he was getting real close to throw the left uppercut. Landwehr hits him with a spinning back elbow, which he might not have made the read on. He might have just been like, everything's going terribly. I'll try spinning. That's a good move. But because Do-Ho Choi was closing in real tight to throw, and he had to drop his left hand to uppercut too, but he was in the perfect position to hit with the back elbow, and he actually really did seem a little bit stunned by that. But yeah, man, amazing performance from Do-Ho Choi. I loved everything about this. Very sad for my boy Landwehr, but he'll take it in his stride. He'll come back and do something cool, I'm sure. Because if he doesn't lose, he probably wins. Dominic Reyes versus Anthony Smith, unbelievably sad. This was a real Oliver McCall one. The only thing was that like Oliver McCall was good enough that he could be visibly crying in the middle of the ring and still stop Lennox Lewis from really hurting him. I've talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but it's such a weird fight because he's like in tears. And I don't think anyone ever worked out what it was about, but he's clearly not there. And he's beaten Lennox Lewis once before as well. And for Lennox, this is like the biggest event of his life. It's the get revenge on the guy who knocked me out. And for Oliver McCall, clearly something else is going on that is making him not care about the fight. And so every time Lennox Lewis steps in, he just bats his punches out of the way and clinches him. And then walks off crying a little bit while the referee breaks them. And then does the same again. And you're like, this is really impressive, but also the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Meanwhile, Anthony Smith obviously was crying on the way to the cage and then got in the cage and just was... Harry Hardwick had a read on Anthony Smith, which is that he sort of like gives up and then the fight continues around him. And there was the classic Anthony Smith, get fetal, hold on to the foot, get beaten up. But the man just doesn't have it anymore. When he was like a middleweight and then his unexpected early run at light heavyweight, that was all good, but, he doesn't have the juice anymore. And obviously the death of his coach had a very significant impact. I always say on this podcast, like a lot of guys will take a fight when something happens because this is the job. And what a lot of people will do under tragic circumstances is that they'll find doing work helps them. So they take a fight, they have a date, they do the work in the gym. That's something to focus on. And then the fight really doesn't matter that much. And that happens a lot in fighting. You'll see that particularly with like experienced veterans who've lost a couple and they're not like on the title trail or anything like that. Definitely with older fighters, I think it's a real coping mechanism. But your team are supposed to stop you from doing that. And, granted, he lost his coach, so he's on like his B team anyway. But yeah, very sad. And I believe he retired afterwards. But Vicente Luque, this one made me anti-sad. What's the opposite of sad? I experience it so rarely on this podcast, I can't tell you what it is. But Vicente Luque, he was supposed to fight Nick Diaz twice. Nick Diaz is obviously not healthy. Some people will still buy tickets for a Nick Diaz fight. Nick Diaz, the name, still moves the needle slightly, which is why I feel it's been sort of a bait and switch that they've done it twice, knowing that he's not in the condition to fight. But once again, Nick Diaz pulled out. He is, in a very bad way, let's say. Temba Garimbo stepped in. Vicente Luque, I don't like watching him fight anymore because he literally almost died of a brain bleed. I feel like that is enough that the commission should be like, let's not do that again. But commissions keep clearing him. The UFC is legally obliged to offer him fights, and he does win some of them. So, he'll carry on. But this one, he fought like the introductory scene of a badass in a movie, because he knocked one good knockdown punch, classic hero move, right hook on the chin as he slipped a right hand, I think, or something like that. But yeah, chinned him almost immediately. Garimbo went down, and then Luque went into his anaconda choke and finished him from there. And it's like, that is exactly how you show a guy knows martial arts in a movie. Yeah, cool. And an anaconda choke, that's not the Luque usual. His usual thing is the D'Arce choke, but he saw it and he rolled for it. And I do love an anaconda. I'm so shit at anacondas. I can finish D'Arce's a lot. I'm really bad at anacondas. Don't give me tips in the comments because I've literally watched everything by all the great anaconda chokers like Rafa Mendes. There is a clip of Rafa Mendes on YouTube. He's rolling with a good black belt, and he taps him like 7 times with rolling anacondas from various positions. Rafa Mendes turned up at like 16 years old to ADCC in 2009, and he just started rolling anaconda choking legends, doing it to guys like Leo Vieira. But it's so cool when you see it done well, and it was done well here because I couldn't believe how fast Temba Garimbo got put to sleep. Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling was a great fight, probably too technical to even get into the details on a podcast, but this links back to what I was saying about making stuff happen. There were a lot of positions in this fight where Aljo, he is the funk master, and funk in wrestling is like, the guy shoots a takedown on you, and instead of trying to defend the takedown standing, you dive for his legs as well. Funk is the thing that they're blaming for like ruining a generation of college wrestlers. Like, why do we do so badly internationally? Oh, all our wrestlers have wrecked knees at like 22. But Aljo gives things up to make stuff happen, and I really like that. If you watched anytime he got in a bad position in this one, he would roll in or turn away, and he'd give Evloev something to get movement happening. But he was also really conscious of what was going on. So there was a bit in the second round where he's coming up in half guard. He gets the underhook and he sits up, and a lot of guys will keep that underhook across the back, which is something you can do stuff with that. You can do the Lucas Leach stuff. You can come up to your knees and start wrestling, but good guys will immediately look for a D'Arce or a front headlock or something like that. And Evloev's moving his hands as if to D'Arce, so Aljamain Sterling immediately drops his hand down and goes for the single leg instead, sits up on that, makes that happen. Because you can't D'Arce a guy as easily if his hand's low and he's going on the single leg. You can D'Arce a guy very easily if his hand's in the middle of your back and you just flatten him out. I thought Aljo's striking looked good in this one. Aljo's striking he doesn't have power, but he's got frames, he's got length, he uses his length well, and he uses elbows well, which I really like because he doesn't have power in his hands, but anyone elbowing you is quite a problem. Because the elbow is so easy it's not easy to learn and master in the way that like landing elbows can be quite hard and dangerous, but there's so few moving parts that it's very easy to elbow with your body weight. And if you throw the elbow as the guy stepping in, him stepping onto the bone instead of a gloved fist that's attached to an elbow that will bend if it meets resistance, and a wrist and hand, even if they're wrapped well, it's still just a bag of bones making contact. The elbow is just one sharp bone. And if a guy runs onto that, that's a problem. So I liked Aljo striking this fight too, even though most of the fight took place on the ground. Evloev did pull ahead, definitely, in the last round, because Aljo ended up on the bottom and Evloev actually sat up and threw some strikes, which is the big difference maker in a lot of grappling matches. The first guy who remembers, oh, this is MMA, I better throw some strikes, tends to win. I just thought this was a really good all-round fight. Obviously, you didn't get the finish, so in some regards, maybe they were right to put Crone versus Bryce Mitchell on the main card, but I feel like they did Aljo and Evloev dirty there, and they came out and did their best here. Evloev's got a really weird build because it looks like he's got massive hands, or he's wearing gloves that are too big, because he doesn't hit very hard, which is normally something that people with massive hands proportionally do, because there's two ways to throw harder punches. You know, it's your, force and mass times acceleration or whatever. You can create more acceleration by lifting weights and developing power, like power cleans and all that sort of shit. You can't really attack it from the other end. I don't see a lot of guys in MMA doing tons of arm wrestling, forearm building, adding some mass to their forearms and wrists. But if you've got big wrists and big hands to begin with, that normally helps you along. Go look at a photo of Sonny Liston's fist. What else did I like from this card? I've been going on forever already. Battle versus Brown, I really like. God, the Randy Brown drop shift. Haven't had to talk about a drop shift, or haven't been able to talk about a drop shift since TJ Dillashaw's days. But the drop shift is a move that Benny Leonard used to do back in the 1920s and 30s. You jab, but you pull your lead foot back to about midway. You don't pull it back to where your back foot is, because then you wouldn't make any progress forwards. You pull your lead foot back and you do a little hop forward with your rear foot. So you're doing a switch step but moving forwards. And at the same time, you poke out the jab, which is now the left straight. But it's not going to have a lot of power on, but it does move you into an interesting position, because now you've got outside foot position and your southpaw. So Randy Brown was able to do that into some nice body shots a lot of the time in this fight. TJ Dillashaw used to do it to throw the left high kick immediately afterwards. Drop shift, very cool. Especially if you poke it to the body. If you do a little drop shift and you poke the solar plexus with your left hand, that really annoys people. And you can come up with a lead hand uppercut or all sorts of weird stuff. A lot of people complaining about Brian Battle abusing the clinch here and not doing much, but I saw him landing good knees. And I felt like Brown was throwing punches and then he'd clinch. He was punching and clutching because he didn't want to get hit leaving range or on the way out. So Brown was initiating a lot of these clinches and Brian Battle was trying to knee him. Obviously, Battle missed weight by a huge amount, so and was then annoying about it in the post-fight speech, but I didn't think he was just trying to hold. I thought both of them were beating up the body. It was a rough night for them both. They will both be thinking of the other when they go to piss later. Anders versus Weidman was depressing as hell. Van versus Durden was good. Maybe I'll talk about that on the boycast. Chase Hooper, let's talk about Chase Hooper and then we'll call it a day, because Chase Hooper being on this card I felt like was a slap in the face to Crone Gracie, because Chase Hooper was Crone Gracie. If you were talking about a guy who just grapples in MMA, that was Chase Hooper until very recently. And he's added little bits to his stand-up, and you don't need a lot of stand-up to be able to effectively use it to get into other positions. And then you look at his wrestling and it's just come on in leaps and bounds. You know, Clay Guida is obviously he's old now, but he's a very experienced wrestler. And Chase Hooper is not, trying to blast him off his leg with a blast double. He's not trying to out-athlete him, but he's getting the overhook and he's throwing him by the overhook. He's getting his connections and he's pulling him in. He's being tricky because he's a big, tall, lanky guy. He's not super explosive, but he can be tricky. And the armbar was lush. Watch his leg configuration throughout that armbar. It's kind of like what if you watch Gordon Ryan finishing an armbar. These guys who actually do know an armbar. Because you can get to the highest levels, like someone like Roberto Abreu, Cyborg, who I've been watching loads of, or Buchecha. When they get an armbar, it's just like, right, whack it on. And then sometimes it doesn't work. You're like, oh. If you watch Verdum versus Vinny Magalhaes, both cool guys, in ADCC, one of the finals. I think it's Verdum ends up in the armbar and he's able to just turn his thumb down and push the top leg. And he gets him into a position where it looks like his arm's going to break at any moment, but Magalhaes just doesn't quite have enough force. It doesn't quite have enough motion to push the arm and enough to hyperextend it. If you watch someone like Gordon Ryan, he's changing his leg positions. He's holding the pad of the thumb. He's pointing the thumb he's pointing the thumb away from wherever he wants to break it. It's really smooth when you watch someone like Gordon Ryan do it. But then he's the best ever, so it's hard to match that. But you've got to have so much experience in the position to even begin to understand that. Most people, when they get an armbar, they freak the fuck out. Because I think a lot of us know that we've got a good chance of losing the armbar, but we should be finishing it, which I think is the worst sort of thing to be in any sort of combat sports. The thing where you don't quite have the knowledge to make it 100% finishing position, but it's supposed to be, and you have to fake it till you make it. But anyway, I thought a pretty decent card. Like I said, I did a film room on Shavkat earlier this week, which you should definitely check out. Or last week, rather. This week, I'm going to do an article on Cub Swanson for the Patreon boys, because he does some cool... He's always done cool stuff. And I've never written as much about him as I'd like, because I would put him in like my top 25 favourite fighters ever, maybe all disciplines. I love Cub Swanson, and I've never really written that much about him. But there's some really cool stuff I got my eye on that we're going to talk about. So yeah, get on the Patreon to read that, and then we'll do the boycast later in the week. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Kennedy entered Chukwu gaining 30 pounds, but none of it being in his legs. Bless.